We are very grateful to today's sponsors, Statcraft, Europe's largest generator of renewable energy, and a great advocate for planning reform in this country, an organization that has made quite clear that they want to invest, that they want to grow offshore wind development and renewable development in this country, but needs the planning reforms to take place. I would like to introduce Claire Walsh from Statcraft, who is their project manager. Claire, could you say a few words, please? Thank you very much.
Welcome. My name is Claire Walsh, and I'm working with Statcraft Ireland as a senior project manager on their development team. Statcraft is delighted to be taking part in this British-Irish Chamber of Commerce event on modernising the planning system, and I want to thank Minister Peter Burke for his attendance at today's event. Statcraft is Europe's largest generator of renewable energy and is now a leading player in Ireland, having tripled our development portfolio and doubled our workforce since entering the Irish market in 2018. In Ireland, Statcraft develops, owns and operates renewable energy and is at the forefront of producing a diverse range of renewable technologies, including onshore wind, solar, offshore wind, battery storage and grid services. With both a climate and energy crisis threatening our world and our very existence, it is now more important than ever to build and invest in renewable energy projects. Ireland has been set with a challenging target to achieve 80% renewable electricity by 2030, which includes 8.2 gigawatts of onshore wind energy. We currently have about 4.5 gigawatts which are operational, 5 gigawatts of offshore, and 1.2 to 2.5 gigawatts of solar projects. The swift and effective development of renewables in Ireland is absolutely central to decarbonising our energy system, our economy, and our society. But this is only achievable with a robust, effective, fair, transparent, and adequately resourced planning system. A huge challenge in Ireland is the planning process. In Statcraft, and I myself are experiencing this in our work on a daily basis, and we hear it regularly from every other company involved in renewables in Ireland. The planning system needs to keep pace with the scale of renewable energy development that is needed to meet our targets. I don't want to paint a gloomy picture, but at a time when renewable infrastructure must be accelerated, we find ourselves incorporating into development timelines the expectation that every project will be appealed, that every project will be the target of an application to take a judicial review, which is almost guaranteed to be granted, and that every project will end up being the subject of expensive and lengthy legal proceedings. Statcraft welcomes the planning reform programme, which is set to bring about fundamental improvements to our planning laws. Our understanding is that the programme will be enacted by year end, but it is vital that this review is completed as quickly as possible, and we urge the Minister to consider bringing forward this date. A few key things need to happen. Statutory decision time periods need to be introduced to remove the uncertainty around timeframes that developers are currently experiencing in advance of our 2030 targets. Fundamental reform of the JR system is required, and adequate resourcing in planning bodies, including An Bord Pleanála and other state agencies such as the National Parks and Wildlife, need to be provided. We agree with the recent call from Wind Energy Ireland for Minister O'Brien to direct An Bord Pleanála to prioritise certain SID applications or appeals that are of strategic, economic or social importance to the state. I'm interested to hear Minister Burke's thoughts on the legislative powers that are available to do this. Currently, it is a statutory objective of An Bord Pleanála to make decisions on appeal cases and SID applications within 18 weeks. Recent research undertaken by Wind Energy Ireland and McCarthy Kevin O'Sullivan on onshore wind energy decisions made by the board since 2020 show that it's taking the board on average 60 weeks to make appeal decisions and 69 weeks to make decisions on SID applications. Both of these timelines are well in excess of 3 times the statutory objective period. I have experience of submitting an SID application to the board in March of 2021, and just on Friday last received an FI request 13 months later. These timelines, combined with the timelines associated with the JR process, are leading to significant delays and adding several years to the development timeline for wind farms in Ireland. There was a very welcome commitment in the programme for Government 2020 to establish a dedicated planning and environmental law court as a separate division of the High Court managed by specialist judges. The establishment of such a court is a significant development in the Irish planning and environmental law system. We urge the Minister to prioritise the delivery of this commitment and to indicate a timeline of when the court will be in operation. A quicker JR system on its own will not accelerate the consenting process. Sufficient resources are key, in particular within An Bord Pleanála, so that they are fully resourced to assess the applications that are lodged and to allow applications to move through the planning process as efficiently as possible. It's a very exciting time in the development of offshore renewable energy. The government has an ambitious target of 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. To achieve this, MARA needs to be set up as soon as possible and more resources and personnel allocated to An Bord Pleanála for quicker processing of offshore applications. A design envelope approach in assessing the applications for offshore renewable energy is also imperative for the delivery of these projects. It is now beyond urgent that we see these fundamental changes in the planning system. While we welcome the Minister's presence here today and his commitment to this issue, we hope this is not simply a discussion, but a starting point for real changes. The stakes are too high not to act now. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I could see a lot of heads nodding throughout Claire's remarks. I know we have a lot of stakeholders from the sector, not only in the room, but online as well, who would be in agreement, not only with the comments you said, but the plan that you had set forward, the various different areas that need to be addressed. So without any further ado, can I please invite our guest of honour, Minister Burke, to join me here for a quick conversation. Welcome to the British Irish Chamber of Commerce. I think this is your first time at one of our events. You've heard it from Claire, and you would have heard it from a lot of stakeholders. Our planning system has been described as slow, cumbersome, expensive, inefficient. It doesn't deliver for investors, developers, or even local communities. And we have had some high-profile cases in this country of investors pulling out, and that's cost jobs and resources for local communities that desperately need them and actually wanted them because of appeals that were in different parts of the country altogether, third-party appeals. You, to your credit, to the government's credit, have set up a review of our planning system. Could you tell us about what the aims and the goals of that review and when it's hoping to deliver a report and what its terms of reference are and what you're hoping will come out of it?
Thank you very much. Yes, firstly, it's a privilege to be at this event this morning. As you know, we're grappling with huge challenges as a government in the last 6 years, from the outset, Brexit, to a global pandemic in terms of COVID, which has not gone away, to a war on mainland Europe, and trying to respond to a massive inflationary crisis. And overarching all of that over the last number of years has been our climate ambitions and the climate crisis that we're grappled with. So I think we have to have context in terms of the operation the government is trying to battle in every single day. But to answer your question directly, in the first instance, I think people really need to reflect on the narrative. The planning system adjudicates on around 27,000 planning decisions every single year. Less than 8% of those go to appeal. So in the main, the planning system does an effective job. Obviously, in terms of some of the bigger projects, there has been huge difficulty with, and that's what I am trying to respond to, particularly in the renewable area and some of the major public infrastructural investment. We're very clear as a government, over the next decade, we have 165 billion euro to invest in public infrastructure. And if that does not get delivered on the ground in terms of real projects, communities are going to suffer. And also, if we don't meet our climate ambitions and our trajectory to get to be a zero carbon economy, it's going to be huge problems. So in the first instance, we are doing an overhaul of the Planning and Development Act. We are consolidating the Act. Obviously, it's over 2 decades in operation. It's been amended a number of times, but also we're looking at, through our advisory group, what way the Act operates, what way statutory timelines are, what way consents are framed, how your local area plans operate in the context of your regional area plans, your county development plan and your national planning framework, how enforcements operate under the Act, and see is it fit for purpose, and stress tested how is it going to deliver this huge public infrastructure investment. And secondly, what we're trying to do is trying to get the law right. So you have to have good law, but also that the courts have a solid bedrock to operate under. And that's why we're trying to undergo a whole area of judicial reform, as well as you referenced in terms of that piece of legislation, which we do need the help of business and the help of society and communities to get over the line, because there's a significant opposition to parts of the bill. And you will know we're in a three-party coalition government, and that puts significant stress, because one of the main issues sometimes I feel people miss is that when you're trying to deliver upon your climate ambitions, you know, that is not always aligned with some environmental interests and NGOs and what way the law is currently operating. So we have a huge body of reform that we're trying to get done. But the good news is that we will have it completed by the end of the year.
So that's the September is the timeline for when the review.
September, the report will be finished, but the legislative change will be significant legislative change that would be required on foot of that report. And we're aiming to have that through by the end of the year.
Okay, so just if we just stick with that just for one moment, because a lot of us have had experience of, and you'll respect, I mean this in a respectful way, we've had experience of government reviews and government reports that, you know, as the old phrase goes, gather dust on a shelf. When the review is published in September of this year, what would you like to see happen next? So some of the things that you'll agree with, some of the things will surprise you, some of the things you may not support yourself. So what would you, how would you like to take the review from a review to, I suppose, implementation going forward?
Well, in the first instance, this is a very clear terms of reference. We are consolidating the Planning and Development Act. So that has a very clear outcome at the end. It's not a review into should we change policy in a particular area or something that is undefined. This is absolutely clinically defined. We'll be reordering the whole Planning and Development Act, making it operationally more easier for users to understand, both in terms of our local authority system, in terms of the board, in terms of practitioners and the public. And also seeing, as I said, you know, what changes need to be made in terms of statutory guidelines, in terms of timelines, and how plans operate within the context of the Act. So all that will be completed in terms of the report in July, but the legislation to underpin those changes will be complete by the end of the year. And we have a wide stakeholder group involved in that role. We're hearing input from all sides, and it's important, what I would say, particularly, I think it's so important that industry does speak up in that group, because sometimes groups like this can be dominated by particular voices. We need planning is about delivering for all of society. And that's why you need to ensure that all of society is reflected in the discourse, that you try and respond to these particular crises that we are in terms of our climate backdrop. Yeah,
so we could get the system right. We could have onboard Planola with the planning process streamlined, as you've articulated, but we will struggle if we don't resource it accordingly. Strategic infrastructure development applications will be an essential tool in this process. And our friends in Wind Energy Ireland estimate that for wind farms alone, there'll be a 35 to 50% increase in SIDS going forward. We know that it takes 24 months for a foreshore license just for a survey in Ireland, as opposed to 24 weeks in the UK. As energy projects differ in scale and substance to other different projects, would you give consideration to, I suppose, a separate unit within onboard Planola that would look at renewables on its own?
Just to give context in the first instance, when you reference in terms of our MACs, or our marine area consents, obviously we have a whole new regime which has become law. The president signed it at the end of December for our whole maritime area, which is 7 times greater than our land mass. So that's really going to be a game changer for this country. We have a target when MARA gets established next year that will deal with marine area consent licenses within 30 days. But that's a lot different to some of the timelines that you referenced. That's the trajectory of where we're going to get to next year. And that's going to be a huge, huge change in terms of how we deliver. We are establishing a separate unit within onboard Planola to deal with maritime and climate. And in that unit, recruitment has already commenced. We've approval this year for 24 additional posts in onboard Planola. We want to first see, obviously, in terms of delivering strategic infrastructure, which is Schedule 7 of the Act, in terms of the amount of scope that there is, it needs to be a lot sharper. I know if there's oral appeals, there's a statutory guideline of 24 weeks. It's been a lot more than that. And that's unfortunately a huge problem if we want to deliver on the ambitions that you referenced in your opening remarks. And we will obviously establish that unit within the board, and on foot of that as well, in terms of the legislative changes that will be made and the resourcing, hopefully that will deliver a whole new picture. But if we're sitting here today and we have now in law a planned trajectory to get to 30 days for a marine area consent license, like that's a stark difference to what was referenced earlier on. So we are going in the right direction, and the board then will adjudicate on the planning applications after that.
Completely 100% agree with you. And Mara, is something that we've talked about in the infrastructure committee, in the energy committee, quite a lot. And as I said, because we're a British Irish Chamber of Commerce, we do the stark contrast between the UK and Ireland, and we've had various events in our energy and infrastructure committee that looked at the stark contrast, because a lot of these companies, they invest in the UK and then they invest in Ireland, and the UK is well ahead of us in terms of offshore wind. And the biggest thing that they do when they look from the outside in at Ireland is making sure we get the legislative process right, get our timelines right, to give certainty to all stakeholders involved. Now, the Planning and Development Act does give the minister some powers to implement fixed statutory decision timeframes as it exists right now, if it's deemed strategically important. Is this something that even in the coming year, that this is something you wouldn't be afraid to utilize where appropriate, especially when we look at our climate targets, 51% reduction by 2030, net zero by 2050. We're going to have to use some of these instruments, aren't we?
I think in the fact that we're setting up a division within Bord Pleanála to deal with marine and climate issues is a significant statement by the government of how seriously it takes the issue, and that they're going to resource that unit. And also in terms of the advisory group and the changes that we're making to the Act will make a huge difference in that regard. So rather than jumping to setting up or giving an emergency order that we want to fast track particular type of applications immediately, I think it's about getting the underlying factors right. And that's what we're trying to do quickly. And July is a very strong, firm target that we will have a report for the reordering of the Act. But secondly, I can say now that approval has been granted for the additional posts within Bord Pleanála and the unit, and that's actively working now. And also we're looking at workforce planning within Bord Pleanála, because even outside of the climate area, there are huge concerns in terms of delays with particular applications. And that's a concern for government, as I said, when you're trying to deliver massive public investment infrastructure over the next decade at record levels that no government in this state ever had the opportunity to do so before. So if we cannot realize the ambition that we have for society and our communities, the board has to be a sharp vehicle to deliver that when appeals are made. And appeals have to be fair. You have to have a very transparent system. What you were referencing earlier on from Statcraft, we have the most open and transparent planning system arguably in the world here in Ireland. And
don't worry, Minister, I'm going to ask you loads of questions about JRs.
That's why you see so many challenges as well. But it's important that people, they can maintain a right to challenge a public decision, but we have to deal with that and adjudicate on it quickly. And that's the key point.
And I'm certainly going to come to that, but I am going to when dealing with energy and climate projects going forward, we've talked about the importance of it. And I do take your point about streamlining and reforming the system, but we have precedent from, I suppose, other crises like the housing crisis, the development of, the strategic housing developments, the speed on the process. Would we look at maybe, and I know I don't want to jump the gun in terms of the report, but would we look at taking some elements out of SHDs and putting them into something similar to climate?
I think it's, when you reference SHDs, it's very questionable how that worked, what the result was. And that really shows, as an example, why you need proper thought in terms of before you rush to make a change, like accelerating a particular type of application process. My view is you have to get the underlying conditions right. You have to get your agencies sharp in how you deal with the applications. I think that's a better approach. If you have strong, robust legislation, if your court system can rely on that legislation to make and adjudicate on decisions quickly, and your appeals administrative section of the planning is working as prescribed in Bord Pleanála, I think that'll be a better place, and that we're committed to setting up a specific unit to deal with that. I think potentially that could be a better response than trying to go alone with a certain direction, trying to accelerate one portion. Now, I haven't made a decision on that. It'd be Minister O'Brien, essentially, if a decision has to be made on it. But I think we're focused first in trying to how we get the fundamentals of the system correct. And we know the challenges, as you referenced, that are there in relation to that.
So we can get the system correct and humming exactly as you outlined. And I think everybody would really welcome that. And it sounds like, in fairness, you've been accredited, but really wanted to tackle this issue head on. So credit where it's due, Minister. But we could even get that right. And then, as you touched on it just a moment ago, and I think a lot of people in this room and online will be very aware of the issues we have with judicial reviews in this country. Now, while we are fully signed up to the Aarhus Convention, and that people have the right for environmental reasons to make an objection, to bring a legal challenge, we are out of sync with the rest of Europe, and we are out of sync with the UK. There's various different issues in relation to judicial reviews. First of all, is the threshold too low? 77% in the UK are rejected at leave stage. My other question is, and this comes from an event that we ran a couple of years ago, Sean, do the courts have the resources? Because some people go in front of the courts and the judge then pushes it. It's taking too long. And one of the suggestions that's being considered is, and it's in the program for government to credit, I want to see where we're at with it, is an environmental court as part of the High Court that's properly resourced on it. Just for a matter of fact, Ireland has the lowest number of judges per capita in the European Union. So, maybe it is a resourcing question. Maybe it is setting up an environmental court, pardon me. And then the last thing is this no-win, no fee approach to some people taking what would be described as frivolous lawsuits, where they're not actively engaged. Now, usually the cost follows. If you lose a case, you're hit with the cost, but there is an exemption in relation to environment. I think you're looking at changing that as well. So I put a lot of questions to you there, Minister, and I would remind everybody to get their questions ready from the floor and through Slido for online participants, to give the Minister some time to gather his thoughts to my multiple questions I've thrown at you in relation to JORs.
Yeah, as you said, it's a very difficult issue. It has been very difficult to deliver public infrastructure in the backdrop of so many challenges, not only in terms of housing, but bypasses, greenways, public infrastructure right across the country. Some things that are so positive for society being challenged through the courts. So, as you said, we have a number of changes that we're trying to make over the next number of months. Some will form part of the review that we're currently doing. Others we're hoping to bring through the Dáil shortly with our substitute consent bill that we have gone through the Shannon, should be in the Dáil in the next couple of weeks. So if you're looking in terms of basic changes, and this is something that really confuses me, is about, public discourse that can be whipped up, that this is trying to stop the public from challenging a public decision. This is absolutely not about that. It's about dealing with a public decision fairly, transparently and quickly, and not having investors or indeed society or communities being held back because the government hasn't the ability to deliver its capital investment program through the Planning and Development Act that is getting subsequently challenged. So I think areas like you referenced there in terms of, when you're trying to seek leave from the court to commence a judicial review, this idea that it's a notice ex parte motion that both sides aren't involved in to see, is there an arguable case? I have seen discourse suggesting that, the judge can see if there's an arguable case or not. But surely a justice should have the liberty of looking at both sides of the argument when making that determination. And I think, if it's a situation whereby some may be resiled from, be it by the board or other parties, if that process was embarked upon at the start, exhausting our administrative process is going to be very important too. We don't want situations whereby the process has been injuncted halfway through. It should be on foot of a decision by the final Court of Appeal, which is on board Penala, and that system should be allowed to run its course when the policy is set. And we'll be very strong in trying to do that and trying to achieve that. And also trying to see that the system is fair. And we've seen particular objections right through public infrastructural projects, delay them by years. And that gives us a very bad reputation as a country for investors looking in as a small open economy, that we rely to counter protectionism at every single hand's turn when we go abroad trying to bring investment into the country. We have to be very careful and solid that we have a system that really underwrites that. Cost is going to be very tricky. I'm very strong on it myself. I have my own particular view on all of this, but I think in a three-party coalition, it's going to be tricky to get to that position. I think we'll have a number of positive changes in terms of judicial review. How far we go, it probably is open to question. And the reasons for that is that some coalition partners have a particular view. and they're very firm in that view. I would be equally firm in my view in terms of you have to have a transparent planning system. It has to make decisions, but you can't have a situation whereby 9 of our 40 High Court judges are adjudicating on judicial reviews. That's not a sustainable position. Hopefully we'll have the Environmental and Planning Court in operation by the end of the year or early next year. That's going to be part of this review as well that we're doing with the Planning Advisory Group and also the AG's office. So we're working hard to deliver that. And obviously that will increase timelines. But as I said, some of these thresholds are absolutely ridiculous at the moment in terms of when you're adjudicating on cases, and that you can find out after getting an investment, getting a significant project, and be it a greenway that will benefit the community, and find out in a week's time that you've had a judicial review that you've had no input into, no part of the adjudication process. I think that's just not sustainable.
And you mentioned, like you've mentioned, you've gone through all the different points about the environmental court at the end of this year. I think that's great news. That's still in terms of the timeline. I take your point in terms of costs and the political nature there, and you've obviously mentioned in relation to the threshold for a JC. Can I ask about the politics? And I don't want to get too much into it, and I obviously don't want to put you on the spot about coalition partners and TDs asking questions. But there is a role for businesses and stakeholders and people in this room to be able to articulate our case. And if you've mentioned the businesses need to step up and maybe articulate more what can we do in a better coordinated, like what's the call to action to us, to people in this room, our Energy and Environment Committee, our Infrastructure Committee, to be able to articulate, aside having these events where we're making the case to you about the various different things, and you've answered all the questions well, but on the political point of convincing minds, what's the best action you'd like to see us take?
Well, in the first instance, I don't want to bring down the government at the British Irish Chamber of Commerce event.
We don't want that either. Yeah.
Look, I think everyone is clear. We've 3 different parties in government. I do think, as I said, sometimes in terms of aligning goals, we all want to achieve the program for government. We want to bring life into it. Largely, we're trying to get to the same end. Yep. It's just the direction and how you get there. And sometimes I think in terms of trying to get to a zero carbon economy, we have to realize that in the first instance, if you have good public policy, if you lose public support for that policy in terms of a transitionary period, it'll end up being left on the shelf. And that's key. I think in terms of how the business community, it's about getting your narrative out there. And I found it a quite lonely place during the summer when I was being challenged last year on these changes in terms of being out on radio, and not much support from any side in terms of being on the airwaves, and getting huge swathes of abuse from people who have a particular view on social media, and trying to put up a basic narrative that you're blocking the public from challenging a public decision, which you're absolutely doing. You're giving you're giving the public an opportunity to have their communities transformed by the most ambitious capital infrastructural program that a government has ever had in this state. And that's what we need to ensure, that decisions are made in a transparent manner, but are made in a timely manner. And if you are trying to market a country for investment in a small open economy that we are, you need to be able to give confidence and certainty to people who are looking to invest, and the state as well, to deliver its infrastructure provision. That we're really embracing an outdoor economy now. We're so much changed post-COVID. We need to be able to hive out the opportunities that were presented by the crisis that was COVID-19, and our planning system needs to be sharp to deliver those huge ambitions. And my view is that business leaders should be out front and center saying, this is what this will mean to your community. If I have a project that's going to be held up for 4, 5, or 6 years between the courts, it's not going to get delivered. And this is what it's going to mean for your community. I think it's important that view from all the business leaders and the organizations to get out there and explain that to people, and that it's not trying to almost exclude a portion of people from challenging a public decision. We do not want that. We just want fairness to deliver public investment. And I take the argument very seriously that these judicial reviews would not be happening if our policy and our laws that underpin were correct. But we're doing massive work now this year on that to ensure that our law is sharp and correct, that our directives are transposed properly and interacting with our legislation properly. There's massive work being done on all that. And as I said, in terms of our maritime area planning bill, which is signed into law now, and an independent authority to oversee the consent process, and also the planning regulator looking in Overhaul to ensure that shared vision is running between the national planning framework right down to your smallest local area plan. You know, the guide rails are set. Now it's to get on with the job and deliver the investment.
Okay, and I think there's two elements of it there that I'm picking up on. One is investment, jobs, brings jobs to the local community. It brings prosperity to those local communities, and we need to bang on more about that. But secondly, and this is the point that I think Claire touched on in remarks, and I touched on, you touched on, Minister, is you can't get to net zero unless we have the proper infrastructure to do so. We build the proper renewable infrastructure to do so. We won't be able to build and develop that infrastructure unless we have our planning laws in place that can do so. So I think you certainly talked about a lot of reforms and a lot of plans in place, and you've also laid down a big challenge to us is when the review does come out and you articulate, and there's some elements that we support, that we shouldn't be quiet on it. And I take that on board 100%. I know the British Irish Chamber does, and I know I see a lot of heads nodding again. We have to be more articulate publicly when that comes out again. So that's a well-made point. I'm going to take questions now from our physical audience, and I remind our online audience to put their questions in via Slido. Claire, so Catherine, we get a microphone to Claire. Watch that. Put the hands in the air for everyone.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Minister, for your comments and input. Going back to one of the points that myself and Paul have both raised on statutory decision periods. So I think you've said that that is being considered as part of the planning review that's taking place. There's also currently legislation to allow the Minister to prioritise and request that the board prioritise decisions on certain types of development that are of strategic importance to the state. Are both of those avenues being considered by the Minister and his department?
Well, in the first instance, Claire, I think that, and I know that the Planning Advisory Group is looking at everything. In terms of decision like that, obviously I don't sit at Cabinet, so Minister O'Brien would be the final decision maker from the department's perspective if we were to go down that road. I think there's a real focus and understanding that the system is not delivering quick enough. So our job in the advisory forum is try to ensure that when we have a new act post December, that it does reflect the urgency that we need to deliver these infrastructural projects, and that there is a more shared vision running through our various different plans, that our timelines are sharp. And we have to look at a whole range of issues. It's not only consents and timelines, it's also enforcement. There's many fraught issues within our Planning and Development Act that over 2 decades were added on piecemeal in terms of changing direction with particular governments. And been a huge challenge over hundreds of pages to read correctly and to reorder. It's a massive challenge this is, and that's why we have the AG has his separate team that are shadowing us. We're feeding into the AG's team to ensure that it's sharp, that everything is going to be as prescribed and as the government wants it to do. And also we have a number of interdepartmental groups set up in the department that are also feeding into the review, again discussing some of the issues that you've referenced there. But I can't just give you in the first instance a commitment before the review is completed, because I'd be immediately accused from having it as a whitewash. This is such a serious review that we have right across the planning spectrum. We've brought in from NGOs, local authorities, private practitioners, business leaders, the renewable sector. We have everyone under the one tent here, and that's why we want to get the best possible outcome from that. And it mirrored what we did with the National Marine Plan. And that's one thing I chaired, that advisory group that brought that legislation. And we had some very diverse people around that virtual table towards the end. And we got the strategy agreed upon, and also then we got the act through from last December. So I think it is tried and tested. Now, the big criticism is that, it's taken time to get the act operational, but at least it's there and it's going to be operational. We have a clear sightline that it's going to be resourced, it's going to be operational, and you're going to have a huge response in terms of the expediency, delays hopefully cut out in terms of delivering renewable licenses.
Okay, and we'll take a couple more from inside, and then I do have a good few, Louise. And just, can you say your name and organization just for everybody else? Thanks.
Hi, Minister, Louise Glennon from SSE Renewables. I suppose Thanks very much for the presentation. The political will is absolutely apparent in order to drive change, and I suppose we could really see that in how MAP passed through the Oireachtas so quickly. But I suppose we've talked about resources, and there's a big focus on Bord Pleanála and resourcing that space. The courts was mentioned, but I suppose there's a wider need for resources, across statutory consultees, for example, that we will have to deal with in relation to environmental impact assessments. So I think the resource issue needs to be progressed beyond ABP. But I suppose to a question, you've referenced Mara. Offshore wind is obviously a big part of SSE renewables plans for Ireland. I'd be interested to hear more about how and when Mara will be established. And I know you're in the process of appointing a CEO and when you expect that to happen. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Louise. And that's going to be the bedrock to really transform our renewable sector, because it's 7 times bigger than our landmass. The huge opportunities that's going to be out there offshore, it's incredible. And we as a government have been very quickly to get the bill through in this particular government. I know it's been hanging around a long time previous to that, but we really put life into it this year to get it operational. And there's a lot of work going on. Obviously, as you referenced, shortly the CEO will be appointed. I haven't a definitive timeline on that because appointments are with the senior minister. So I can't just unfortunately tell you something that I'm not responsible for. But I do know from early next year, Mara will be in operation. It will be resourced. Those timelines will be 30 days to deliver the consents, and then it'll be straight over to Bord Pleanála in the new unit that I referenced to try and deal with the planning applications. And that will be resourced to do that, because I think the state is very clear. If we are to realize our ambitions, and they are significant, to get to the trajectory to get to a net zero economy is very stark. To get our 51% reduction target by the end of this decade is colossal. And I think government realizes that. They realize the challenge. So it's about getting the system sharp, lean to deliver. And I think that will happen. And I'm working with Minister O'Brien to try and ensure that that gets a strong focus in the department.
Thank you very much. I've got 2 questions in from Slido, and then I'll revert to the, actually I've got numerous questions in from Slido, but there's 2 I'll take together. One is about best practice and looking at other jurisdictions worldwide. Now, I appreciate we have constitutional restraints and other restraints that don't allow us to do certain things, but are you looking at other jurisdictions for a model that you think is a suitable model in terms of planning? Because obviously other countries go through the process a lot quicker than us. And just linked to that somewhat is the government's ambition for the all-island economy. And we see the Shared Island Unit has done quite a lot of work, and we're doing a lot of north-south infrastructure, all-island infrastructure, but we're 2 different planning regimes. Has there been thought of creating, like akin to the single electricity market board, that there would be, an infrastructure board, north-south, that would look at just coordinating, I suppose, the infrastructure and planning laws north and south to maybe get some of these projects? Because, we know this from the north-south infrastructure, we can do it right on our side sometimes, and it can be delayed on the north, and then vice versa. So better coordination there as well. So international best practice of other jurisdictions, and I suppose a joined up thinking in terms of planning north-south.
Yeah, we've taken a deep dive right around Europe, looking at the advisory forum and the underlying conditions that exist in other European countries. And it is absolutely frightening to look at in terms of, when you speak in terms of our judicial review side, and for the courts to give leave to an application. Some countries are less than 25%. I'd say we're running about 96% in this country. And that's one of the challenges that we have to see. Why is it quicker in other countries to deliver public infrastructure? And we saw, not that I'm a proponent of them, but the Apple case with the data center and their different experience in Denmark. I think we have to be, and I just want to be very clear, it's not in relation to that I'm a proponent of data centers, but I know the need for them. But in the first instance, it's just an example of delivering public infrastructure. If the data center is correct, it should go ahead. If it's not, it shouldn't. But the system should adjudicate on that in a reasonable time frame, not 6 years. So I think those are the things we have to resolve, and that's why it's so important. In terms of our shared island, there's massive funding going into that initiative. Yeah. We've heard some brilliant speakers in terms of what they're bringing to the debate. People who have grown up in the North, have experienced what some communities have went through and how transformational it can be if we cooperate closer. Now, Brexit obviously is a massive challenge to that. And, you know, we've had some discussions even before this meeting of how we need to try and improve our relations and connectivity. We've some major infrastructure projects that we are contributing to now as we speak in terms of that context. But, you know, we're very open as a government to try and explore more opportunities to try and align systems that can deliver public infrastructure for people. And I remember when I was up in Dundalk recently, or Meath, looking at a huge Irish water infrastructure investment that they were breaking ground on that's going to support the people in that community. We announced more money for our shared island initiatives for cross-border opportunities that we can really, you know, build confidence between our two communities. And that's what it's about, really. It's about building confidence that we can work together for the betterment of our citizens, North and South. And we want to get that message out so hard post-Brexit.
I think I will 100% agree with you, Minister. And the resourcing is certainly being put there, and it's to their credit. And we've welcomed it at numerous occasions. In fact, we think it should be developed somewhat on a two-island basis to take that model forward. But specifically, I suppose, on the planning, it's two different planning regimes. What type of coordination? I appreciate that there's only so much you can do, but what type of coordination is there between, I suppose, the Department of Economy and your department?
We've regular meetings. And I've met myself with my opposite number. I met Minister Hargett there around a few months ago, trying to progress different initiatives, how we can learn from our different experiences. But it's devolved government there. It's obviously a different system that I have control over. Yeah. What we have to do is try to work together to get those common ties. Now, that is a challenge post-Brexit. And we know in terms of the operation of devolved government is going to be extremely difficult to predict in the next number of weeks. And, you know, some of the remarks we've heard in terms of dealing with the protocol are uncertain at the moment, when we know we have the best product to deliver for our country you could ever have, and making, you know, the very best of a very bad situation. And look, we're absolutely open to working together with our northern counterparts. And I just can't give an exact answer that I would like to say. Yeah. You know, we have agreed we're going to do X, Y, Z to mirror the objectives we have here in the Republic, but we're working together to try and deliver as much shared opportunities. And that's why the shared island was established in the programme for government. It's trying to hive out those opportunities that exist between North and South relations and trying to expand on them, and post-Brexit to strengthen ties with the UK.
It's an excellent initiative, something we completely support, and we're participating in it.
And it's core to what you do here and the great work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're going to take a couple of questions from the floor. John, do you want to ask a question? Oh, you'll come back. Anybody, a couple of questions from the floor, and I do have one online. Sean, yep.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Minister. Thanks, Paul. Sean Finlay, Chair of the Infrastructure Committee for the Chamber, and I'm a Director of Geoscience Ireland as well. Just standing back a little bit and taking a longer term view, because infrastructure is long term. And we do have bits of infrastructure here that were delivered 200 years ago. Some of them are still fit for purpose, some are not. But I'd like to just provide a bit of perspective in, if we look at, say, waste management, 20 years ago, it was chaotic and it's much improved. It's not perfect, but it's much improved. And it was based on policy reviews and then implementation. Similarly, we had a lot of concerns about the level of claims that were being awarded in the courts for injuries, personal injuries, and that seems to have changed because there was some policy changes. So I'd be hopeful that what you're doing and what your department are leading on will lead to the kind of transformation that is needed. There's no one perfect system anywhere in Europe, but some are better than others, and certainly the planning system in the UK for renewables, offshore renewables, is probably among the best in the world, and that's something we should look to. And I'm greatly heartened to hear that something that was proposed by the Chamber, the Environmental Court, is on your agenda, and so is MARA, and that the bill has been passed. So I'd be confident that we can get to where we need to get to, and I can assure you that the Chamber will continue to support whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. So that's not really a question, it's more of an endorsement and maybe providing a bit of perspective that these things do take a bit of time, but they are a lot more urgent maybe than they were 20 years ago. So wish you well with the review and looking forward to seeing it. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Sean. And just to, that's why I was very clear in acknowledging that, you know, we had the Maritime Area Planning Bill through very quickly last year, but it was a long time on the bean and genesis before that. And your chamber played a key part in articulating the voice and the need for change in that sector. And you've referenced areas that you have been key in doing. And that's why it's so important. And I in no way say this is a criticism, but it's just so important that we have business leaders, business voices to the forefront and trying to deliver a lot of this infrastructure, because you are valued and you're badly needed sometimes in a debate that can get so narrow in focus, because, you know, we are part of, you know, a huge movement of change, and that has no understatement over the next decade in this country. And to have a figure like 165 billion to spend on public infrastructure and getting away from the days where the state was borrowing just to wash its face, you know, when we can borrow for public infrastructure, for capital investment, that's what's going to deliver change back to society. It's going to have a massive payback for citizens, and it's something that won't get the state into trouble. It's when you're trying to borrow to, you know, respond to you know, revenue crisis around the country from day to day, that's where you get into real difficulty. So this is a very exciting time that we really need our systems to be sharp to deliver it, because that's why through even our urban and regeneration development funds, over 2 billion, we're keen to get them allocated early, because we're so aware that it takes time to spend capital investment, and we need to get these funds allocated now and delivered as quickly as we possibly can. And a system that underwrites that needs to be sharp and effective, and that's what we're trying to do over the coming months.
Minister, we do have more questions, but we're not going to get to them. What I'm going to say is, if there's anything you'd like to add before I invite John McGregor, our Director General, to say the closing remarks and thank yous. Okay.
Jason's question. Sorry, I beg your pardon, John McGregor from the Chamber, and absolutely appreciate your making time for this really incisive discussion today. The other arm of your brief, of course, is local government as well as planning, and we talked a lot about planning and appropriately. So I had the pleasure of dining last night with a gentleman called Owen Laverty, who's the economist with Dunleary Rathdown Local Authority. And he really inspired me in terms of a modernized vision of the responsibility taking at local authority level and the vision for creating a much better environment for everybody involved. What's your own vision for the future of local authority structures and the local government, if you like, place in our world over the next while? Because looking back, I could probably say we've had a bit of a love-hate relationship with the idea of local government over the years.
In the first instance, I really value it. I know it provides over 1,000 services right to the citizen. So it's the closest arm of government to the citizen. We're absolutely involved in, you know, bringing in the greatest reforms since the foundation of our state and local government right now. We're trying to get a directly elected mayor in Limerick. That's going to be a colossal achievement. We'll have the bill hopefully through in the summer or soon after it. And that again is devolving, you know, decision making locally. But I just want to reference in terms of we're changing the funding structure in terms of how we're doing with our property tax and how we're dealing with that, and local authorities getting to retain that, which unfortunately they hadn't heretofore. But outside of that, when I look around and see some local authorities, Wexford, for example, and I see members in those local authorities, you know, taking such responsible decisions by increasing be it rates and property tax, but delivering, you know, joint ventures with the private sector in terms of business units to attract employment into the area and into the region. You know, some of our local authorities are doing incredible work, and we're restored a two-stage process now, which was formerly the SHD, as you referenced, which will bring more funding back into the planning sections of our local authorities, because they're going to keep the funds for those large-scale housing developments. So there's a lot of great work doing, but my view is that we need to devolve as much power as we can locally. And if we as a government are paying director of services and chief executives, you know, they should be taking the decisions then. It's their job to do that. It's our job as at national level to get government policy through, and a regulator will, you know, acutely oversee that.
Thank you very much, Minister. You know, I'm going to invite John to say maybe a few closing remarks, but before I do, is there anything you'd like to just conclude with to give you the final say?
I thanks very much for your engagement. It's very important to me. I absolutely value what you're doing in terms of bringing closer ties with our near neighbours. And that's so important right into the future, because it's an area that we need to work so hard on. And the government has to really step up post-Brexit and do more in that area. I'm absolutely aware of that. Yeah. And also just my big ask is that we work closer together and trying to deliver this transformational change, because it's going to be a big year ahead. And I am not naive in terms of politics. There is going to be massive changes. I could be back in a year's time and there could be, unfortunately, you know, that I mightn't have been able to get all that I want to get through a lot of these reforms. So it's important that people are front and center, and not to ignore when you see a debate, be it online or nationally or anywhere else, you know, not to take it for granted, oh, that'll fizzle out after a few weeks. Some key decisions can be taken in that time frame, in the backdrop of public discourse that wasn't balanced. And it's important that we have balance in terms of what we do, and we try and bring that, me as a politician listening to all sectors of society, borne out by on the ground the number of people that are on our advisory fora. But we do need to get decisions made. We need to get them made quickly. We need to invest this money into communities that we have committed now as a government, and you are a key and valued partner in doing that.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our Director General, John Mcgregor.
It's actually extraordinarily exciting to have a minister in a role with such conviction, such intelligence behind all of that, and such a commitment politically and vocationally to deliver things that really, really do need delivery. We are not for anything anti-democratic here. We are a trade body. We are apolitical in that role, and we're proud to be. But we are, and we take responsibility for being a catalyst for the enablement of the political policy actions that are right for our communities, right across these islands, actually. And you know, Leo Varadkar was speaking at the Global Irish Conference 2 weeks ago, and he talked about, you know, I suppose the gradual emergence of the idea of, you know, a strategy for this and another review for that. Like, again, nothing anti-democratic in our point of view on this, but we really do need to help people who want to take action to get it done. Responding to the loudest squeak is never a good strategy overall. We are about democracy. We are about the right to be represented, but we also have to get things done, or else everybody loses. I mean, Ireland today is in a phenomenally unique position, notwithstanding massive global issues and issues closer to home in these islands. But, you know, suddenly an island with 7 times its land mass in water, and suddenly Irish weather combined with that is looking like, you know, as David McWilliams has recently characterized, we could be the Qatar of the West. We feed the world. We can provide the world's energy in substantial proportion and in green, clean, low carbon, zero carbon format, and many other attributes. And of course, with the skills base and a demographic of some of the best educated young people in the world, and diverse and welcoming to all. So you're in a key role. We hear you loud and clear. It's very important that we be part of the business voice to support you in your hour of need and not leave you feeling lonely again out there, I can assure you. And we hear you, and we will directly respond to that. Thanks for coming to us. Thanks to all our in-person members and our audiences all around the world, now that we can. And thanks so much, most of all, to Claire Walsh and her colleagues at Statcraft for your fantastic support for what we do here, not just today, Claire, but throughout the annual roster of our work in this broad space of energy and climate. And thanks indeed to Sean Finlay, who extremely ably chairs the British Irish Chamber's infrastructure group and has been a constant support under all of this work as well. Thanks to your own team, Minister, for their support in organising today. And thanks to our own friends in our own team in this initiative, the first of our new hybrid programme, engineered by the combination of Anna Taylor and our technical colleagues. And to our event team on this occasion, again, led by Catherine Coffey and Aidan Finnegan and the rest of the team elsewhere around the building and beyond. What we do for you. We hope we do it well. And again, please join me in giving a great British Irish round of applause to our keynote speaker today, the Minister.